It's a fly in here somewhere. It's a fly here, and I'm gonna catch that damn fly. I'm gonna catch that damn fly. It's somewhere in here, lurking. What's up, everyone? After the long wait, I finally managed to get to this series that I've been dying to start. My video series on the main Resident Evil games. The numerical ones, not like the random spin-offs, not the zeros, not the Code Veronicas, the numerical ones, because that's the only ones I'm playing, with the exception of 6. I'm very new to these still very new, in fact, to the point where Village was the first Resident Evil game I actually beat. I played 4 and 5 back in the day, but for some reason I really didn't like them. I guess my video game taste changed. Maybe I just slept on it. Maybe I just didn't know what I liked. I don't know. I love survival horror, but apparently I guess I just sleep on them every time. First, I actually want to start off with 7. It's a bit weird not starting off with 1 because I'm kind of going backwards. Because other than 4, so far it's my fave between the 2, and by far 7 is between the 2 of 7 and 8, in other words. And by far, 7 is the more superior and scarier game. Playing through it, I can understand why 7 is highly favored and why people are pissed that they toned down the fear factor in 8. Because why tone down the scariness of a scary game? It seems very counterproductive, in my opinion. Soft-ass game critics, the soft-ass game players. Just make it scary, guys. Just make it scary. It's known for a fact that Resident Evil 7 is Capcom's comeback kid. Before I get started, be sure to help me out and give me a like on the video. And also, click the subscribe button to get a bit more from me. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot. My voice is a bit weird because phlegmy, but I'm going to try and talk as best as I can through this. With the amount of trash titles like Awesome Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, The Fate of Two Worlds, and mind you, I'm not saying Fate of Two Worlds, the original 3 wasn't that bad. I played it, it was good. It wasn't up to par with 2, and that's just a known fact. 2 is better than 3 still. We're not going to talk about Ultimate, but that's a story for another day. And of course, a damn zombie shooter. That was Resident Evil 6. Capcom's leading titles were just catching more L's than everyone combined that brought Sonic 06. A field catalog of low-quality titles, Ace Attorney games, and delicious monster hunters sprinkled on top of a crap cupcake. Capcom finally made a new masterpiece that was in Resident Evil 7. And I'm not saying the Ace Attorney and Monster Hunter games were bad, because people loved them. It's just the base of the Capcom titles that just wasn't producing. Capcom wasn't producing. If you play games, you know this. If you play games, you know Capcom has been on the board of failing studios. Unfortunate. Street Fighter V. As someone who apparently loves the survival horror genre, Dead Space being one of my favorite franchises of all time, starting this game off in a dark-ass house where I could barely see anything in front of me is my dangerous cup of tea. Even though I have to say, how down bad was Ethan Winters? He randomly drives out in the middle of nowhere because he heard his ex-wife was alive in his hillbilly-ass hick town called Dolby, Louisiana, and goes to find her by himself, alone, with some damn dress slacks and dress shoes. My God, why? Who does this? Why did you not think this through? I'm so confused on this man's logic. This is after he heard she died on a ship when she was like the handler or something, or some researcher for a new bioweapon. That was Evelyn, the crazy little scary girl that's in this game. We're gonna talk about her later. I'm low-key kind of almost glad this man died in the beginning of the game. Based on sheer white people horror movie logic, goes to this, puts himself in a situation. Not to mention gets his hand sliced off with a chainsaw early on in the game. Later, it makes sense why he just randomly sticks his hands and or other kind of body parts that gets detached from him back like glue. It's because he's already affected by the mold. This is one interesting key detail they don't actually tell you through the entire game until Village. So before Village, we're just thinking has some symbiote-ass body for no reason. And essentially also, he was supposed to be dead after the father of the family, the main villain, Jack, stomped out in the beginning of the game. Welcome to the family, son. Scene that everyone knows. Welcome to the family, son. Bow. Knocks his ass out. One of the things I actually want to point out in the game is just observing the layout of your pack. I can tell this game is going to be a lot harder than Village. Village was an absolute walk in the park because they didn't give you a stick to throw in the game. The amount of calculations I had to make was absolutely like demonic. There were points where I would kind of get stuck, die, and would be like, I have 2 shots with this, enough to make 2 bullets and a Molotov, but I have to make all successful headshots if I pull this off. This game gave you absolutely nothing. They were just like, this is really survival. This is really a survival game. We're gonna put your survival skills to this test. Here's a knife to start with. Good luck. I wasn't upset. I really prefer a challenge when it comes to scary games. And I prefer scary games to give that sense of urgency because it's super vital in my opinion. If it doesn't, it just takes away from the overall horror aspect and turns it to an easy shooter. Hence Resident Evil 6, why nobody probably liked it. I think it's really interesting how they made such a drastic change between 7 and 8, especially if these two are connected. Out of 4, 5, 7, and 8, 7 was in fact the one I had to strategize the most with. Not only was it the case of weapons and ammo, but this was also the case with key items and keys in general. So there was a point in which I had to swap items into these chests that when you essentially make it to a certain save points, you can swap out items because your pack's gonna get too full, like every other Resident Evil game you played. And essentially, I put my ass and wrist on through these dangerous levels with already low ammo to get that said item that I needed because I had low item slots. The game absolutely taunted me in this point. It was like, haha, you're so close but so far away. You need this item. You got 1 slot, but you need this item at the same time. You suck. You suck. You suck. I had to take breaks when I came to this point because the amount of stress of going back and forth fighting with the molded, which was the main enemies of the game, was a bit too much for me. I don't know about anybody else. Does anyone else have to take breaks from survival horror games when it feels like you've kind of filled this imaginary like stress meter? Because I do. It's a bit much. I gotta do it. Going back to Jack Baker, this whole family kind of gave sort of a Leatherface, Chainsaw Massacre vibes. And it also doesn't help that Mia's ID is literally from Texas. I don't know if they did that on purpose, but it works out perfectly, right? Nice. The infamous dinner table scene when they all first appear has pretty much been listed as one of the most famous scenes in a Resident Evil franchise, if not one of the most in gaming history at this point. It's a very famous scene. Everyone who plays the game, that Resident Evil essentially put Capcom back on the map, and it's a very good game. The game actually perfectly pieces a graph of the individuals that you will be coming face to face with in the future, with the exception of Zoe Baker, which I'll explain in a bit. This leaves you kind of with a ton of confusion because there is this creepy ass, old ass, ancient ass, was alive during World War II looking ass, making Genkai look like a young, spry looking child looking ass. I saw the original Santa Claus on my roof, old ass lady. Like, she is so old. Like, yo, how are you this old? I swear she's like 239 years old. She randomly appears in certain parts of the game, and her head will follow you in any given moment. Like, you can see her looking at you, like when you're walking across certain places, her head will follow you wherever you're going. And it's just super creepy. Switching some gears here, I want to talk about the Baker family for a bit, which I kind of was already on, so I didn't know why I needed to say that. Kind of character by character, though, because they're such an interesting bunch. They all have their different quirks, feels, and all so different personalities. They all seem to have that kind of like possessed by a demon, exorcist feel to them without feeling like the same fleshed out character, which is amazing. Jack Baker, you fight multiple times, which is why I say he's like the main villain other than Evelyn, who ends up actually being the creepy old grandma at the end of the day. Spoiler alert, that kind of happens. I mean, the game's been out since 2018 or something like that, if you kind of know, if you're kind of watching this video at this point. So, I mean, it is what it is. Jack, in my opinion, is the most psychotic of the family. Early on, from chopping Lucas's arms off in the starting scene, to piercing a shovel through a cop's head, and even trying to impale Ethan through steel beams. This man is on some Mike Myers game logic right here. I don't know what he's doing. He's gone insane. I don't like him. He comes just chasing you constantly throughout the game. Usually in the beginning of the game, you fight him multiple times, as I said. And can we go back to what he did to the cop? I understand F12, but the cop was black, and they live in Louisiana. I'm sensing some racial conflicts here. I'm sensing some racial conflicts. I'm sensing some. I don't know how comfortable this is, because I bet if he was a white cop, I bet if he was like, hey, let's talk it out first, young boy. Let's talk it out first, young boy. But you know, it's probably a mod where you can find a KKK cloak in his closet. I'm just kidding. That's not gonna happen. I don't. There's no way that mod's gonna slide anywhere. It's not gonna happen. I believe Jack was the most affected by the mold based on how he acts, because he kind of gets more like demented and brutal as the game progresses. Before I move on to my favorite villain in the game, I want to talk about the structure of the Baker Manor. It's a big ass house, and one of the things that I really wanted to know was how the hell they were gonna make this long, scary game with a normal house. But to be honest, it's pretty much the size of a mansion. In case most people don't know, but the Baker residence was originally going to be like the Crazy Cowardly Dog house, like in the middle of nowhere with a lot of stretched land around it. But developers determined that wasn't scary enough, so they made multiple pieces in like a Louisiana bayou, which was kind of like a lot better in my opinion, because in the bayou it's going to be dark, it's going to be swampy, wet and rainy, really dirty, especially when like people aren't maintaining the property. And it gives you kind of a feeling of escape is futile. Once you're in so deep into it, there's not like a point in running away, and if you're in trouble, no one's really gonna hear you scream, so that kind of adds to a lot of effect as well. So I'm really kind of glad that they decided to change the overall feel of the Baker house. So it's split up into pieces of the property, which is pretty dope, because this makes everything kind of just feel so fresh moving on to the next section of the game. I also love how they incorporated using keys like the scorpion key, crow key, and snake key. Obtaining these really gave a sense of accomplishment. Once you started solving puzzles to get these keys, it really felt like you were finishing part of the game, because the amount of time and careful detail it took to get through these certain fights, battles, and puzzles, it really felt like you kind of was struggling in about mid-game. So now I'm going to move on to briefly talk about my favorite villain of the game, the savage bug mama herself, Marguerite Baker. She's a bit of an ass, might I say. Like, she's out here calling you a bitch and cocksucker and whatnot. Like, lady, chill, why are you so rude and grotesque? Marguerite was such a nice lady prior, but you wouldn't think that. One of the things that I found cool actually going through her section of the game was that I felt like the game itself gave you more details on her process of getting infected by the mold through her journal. From her noticing strange things about Eve after they found her, from her head pains and nausea she was having, to the doctor's visits trying to understand the issue. This somehow made her seem a bit more realistic and a bit more human to the player. Maybe made you feel a bit more sympathetic for her, to be honest. If you actually listen to her walking around in the game when she searches for you, she still has that caring, nurturing mom vibe, except it's kind of portrayed in the more demented, psychotic, mommy dearest manner. So it's kind of not caring. The boss battle with Marguerite was also a top tier fight. Going into the greenhouse from the old house, her transformation was super freaky. Up to here, you really haven't seen any wild complete transformations in the game. So this was the first enemy to really go 110% on you once she actually figured calling you names wasn't going to give you enough damage. The only issue that I had with this battle was not only was it so dark, but the blood spatter on the screen while taking damage was extremely frustrating. And usually the blood splatter is just like, it kind of helps in the game because it kind of makes you know like how low you are on health, when you need to heal yourself. But with this, it's kind of too much. Between watching out for her, crawling on ceilings and walls, and watching out for her bugs and hives that was kind of just nested around the place, I did run out of ammo a number of times, and I had to walk out like Sarah Connor, the end of OG Terminator. Not even gonna lie, Sarah Connor vibes. I was bleeding. I had a busted arm. I felt like Vegeta when he got kicked in the arm by 18. But you know, it is what it is. It was a good fight. And Ethan's kind of an absolute trash character at self-defense. Like, why does the man only put up his hands and like jog when some wild is chasing him down? Like, at least try and throw a punch. Like, who is this man? How are you not combative at all? Like, they really gave you the most average Joe ass guy in this game to play with. Marguerite's is really my favorite enemy in the game, regardless of like me hating bugs. It kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies. But hey, it was a good fight, so I can't complain about that. I love the challenge. Overall, Resident Evil 7 is a consistently terrifying game. However, there are many parts in the game that's just like kind of absolutely horrific more than others, but in a good way nonetheless, such as the crawl space when you're searching for the arm, for the D-Series serum, some final parts in the ship's wreckage with the Mia playthrough, and my personal favorite, the basement where the dissection room is. I absolutely hated and loved this section of the game, both at the same time. Upon entering, it gives you a sense of utter dread. With only the slight flicker of your flashlight, it's really dark when you kind of come in here. Perfect explanation of this is literally being a descent to hell if I was to like describe it perfectly. And that's literally what it looks like. When you first encounter the molded here, it's not really implied that it takes several shots to kill him with a normal pistol. So much to the point where you can run out of ammo trying to take only one out, and it gets really bad when they essentially kind of gang up on you multiple times. And this is already part of the game when you're already scarce on ammo, and it's highly disrespectful. So when they ambush you, it isn't really a walk in the park, but more getting surrounded by multiple DOs. It's best to have a shotgun in hand here. Around this part of the game is where you should be expanding your weapons variations, and it's actually really needed. It's kind of hard to kind of relax yourself in first-person horrors because this game doesn't really allow you to do so. The molded, especially the four-legged ones, are very fast, and for a character as slow as Ethan, it's kind of like dread the entire time. I tried to give myself the thought of molded are just humans, soaked and trapped in the bioweapon juice itself. I tried to tell myself that, and it was essentially useless. They're still terrifying, they're still scary to get in your face, and I still ran away. This is also one of the places where you encounter the creepy ass grandma again. After this part of the game, she kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, and she's not like a normal character. She's not like the rest of the family. Why is she down here in the pitch black by herself? How did she even get down here? Why she's in a wheelchair? Did she float? Professor Xavier, how is any of this possible? You just kind of have to ask yourself these questions in the midst of this game. The basement is also where you encounter Jack Baker in a butcher room, and this is like your third encounter with him. This time with essentially a chainsaw, and as you can see, there's a trend of him getting more and more brutal each time. However, you have some ever so friendly corpses to slow him down with while you're making some Baker stew. The next member of this pest-ridden family dinner table is Baker's son, Lucas. Around this part of the game, the molded will essentially follow you everywhere on the house. I guess they're starting to notice, oh, this average Joe-ass mother has found a secret to Manor. Let's run around begrudgingly and attempt to stop him, but also fail in the process. You start realizing that Lucas is essentially kind of an evil genius, but also a psychopathic killer. A problem child that left the corpse of one of his childhood bullies in the attic of his own home, left to die of starvation and thirst. A natural-born Linda Hazard, if you will. Linda Hazard, if you don't know, is a 19th century medicine specialist and a doctor that was convicted of starving her victims. Fun fact of the day, everyone. Once the BSA raids his house, he pretty much finishes off the DLC. This man's pretty much definitely getting convicted. It's kind of pretty much a done deal at this point. Let it sink in that this kid literally went to sleep peacefully every night, knowing that someone he willingly put in the attic just above him was just dying slowly in a painful death. Yeah, the mold barely affected this nigga, I'm 100% sure. Ethan finds a video of Lucas doing a torture game of Clancy, who's one of the cameramen from the beginning of the game. Essentially, he goes to the same situation. I can't lie, but besting Lucas was super satisfying, as he absolutely swore he cannot be bested. The entire puzzle game, from a neon-lit club field tunnels to being attacked by the fat muck of mold, to reaching your hand to a clogged toilet with that I would hope not would be the result of a feast of Taco Bell, is kind of your only interaction with Lucas. You never actually come face to face with him except for seeing him through the gated door and the DLC, which isn't part of the normal game. When you really think about it, you really only fight the mom and dad of the family. Zoe is the only sane one who kind of helps you throughout the whole situation, and she seems like just a fun ball of joy when you get to know her. However, I do have to admit, with all the help that she gave you, I really hope she found her way with the cure, or to a cure with the BSAA, because I felt really bad knowing you have to make a decision between Mia and Zoe to who you're going to give the cure to. Realistically, you're going to choose Mia. I don't really know what the ending is if you choose Zoe, but it's not the same. It's not the original ending. This kind of happens all after you finish your final battle. Jack Baker, in his final form, that I kind of refer to just Eyes of Unspoken Places. His final form is pretty much EA in his Jigan Eye form, but someone just made him swallow a bomb that was set to detonate. I literally played cat and mouse with this man back and forth, running up and down ladders until he had a few openings. Not a bad fight, but he holds the title for most fulfilling opponents, flopping around like a magic harp. This leads me to our final experiences of the game, to the Shipwreck territory where Mia originally went down and sank. This is kind of confined to numerous small enclosed dark spaces with the molded in pretty much in every corner. It's a very continuous, monotonous, long drag. It really doesn't pick up in this section until you move back to Ethan and come across the research lab with more information regarding Evelyn. A lot of this ship is actually very unsettling because Mia feels even more useless than Ethan somehow. I think it's because up until this point you made it through the game with Ethan, and you kind of concluded, you know, he can use weapons, he can kind of fight on his own, even if it's not the best way of fighting. It gets the job done. Mia's pretty much just been a damsel in distress up to this point. This entire part of the game is just pretty much going back and forth between floors over and over again until the most slow, tedious way possible. It just feels like a maze, and from what I hear, most people actually didn't like this part of the game. Story-wise, it was fine, but from a gameplay perspective, I can really agree. I took too many breaks also during this section of the game, and not only that, but it just felt like it was like a never-ending situation. And by the end, and by the time it was over, I was a bit too flinchy, uneasy, stressed, and had that constant feeling of somebody chasing you, when you can really feel like they're a centimeter from touching the back of your neck. Because I had to give myself cat eyes, because it's super dark, and pretty much the mold was just blending in with the grass and dirt on the ship because it just sat there and molded too much. Pretty much just Batman at the end of the day. After switching back to Ethan, you finally kind of make peace with the actual Baker family. You actually kind of feel pain for them, in a way. They make you actually feel at peace because you get a chance to speak with them and see eye to eye, which kind of has never happened in the game. And essentially, the developers gave you a sense of feeling and emotion for these characters the entire time, as you were still seeing them as enemies, but they were essentially a innocent family that kind of got stuck into a terrible situation. With Jack kind of asking you to kind of free his family by the end of the game, and I'm kind of tearing up and expecting this is how I feel when Luffy finally finds One Piece at the end of the series in 2030 or whenever the crap One Piece ends. This final stretch was actually pretty fun and actually decent challenge. It's kind of like a home base for the molded, and you kind of have to think to yourself, how many people actually died in the Baker's case? Because the molded are actually defeated dead people. So, and it's kind of like an army, so it's kind of like disturbing how many people have died in the situation. And I have never actually wanted to shoot a small child in the face with a shotgun so much in my life, because Evelyn kept sicking these mold on me, and I'm like, just come in it yourself and stop sending your armies at me, please. Overall, the final boss, it's a good battle, and it's for an even trade-off of pretty much having no space, because it starts off in the pretty much a tiny room and kind of like expands, crashing out of the house, and you're pretty much having to just dangle and aim. Pretty simple fight, pretty simplistic conclusion, and that's kind of how I can kind of go about it. To conclude, Resident Evil 7 was a game that pretty much took risks, but it was a risk that its developers and players actually wanted. The game changed the landscape of horror games and brought a new light to a series that was carrying a dying flame. With developers such as Makoto Kandano and the OG executive producer from the original Resident Evil, Jun Takeuchi, there was a team pretty much created of old school Resident Evil producers and directors that had a vision to make a classic horror game with modern day technology. With the essence of the Resident Evil fling that was originally from what it was from 1, 2, and 3, RE5 and 6 was pretty much meant to go against shooters like Call of Duty or Medal of Honor. This was an entire different vision of where Capcom actually wanted to push the franchise. This, along with the newly developed RE engine, short for Reach for the Moon engine, they were able to use a process called photogrammetry. This was essentially how RE7 was still a very beautifully done game, even if it was super dark. If you took a look around at the details of whether it's furniture or the molded or enemies or just the characters themselves, it was a very beautifully done game. And items made from scratch, but scanned in an extremely high quality. The RE engine was in fact detrimental to the success of RE7. RE5 and 6 was created with MNT framework, and the beginning of 7 was created with Unity and transferred everything over to the RE engine. They've pretty much used it for every newer titles such as the newer DMC that came out, and obviously, of course, the new Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3 remakes. We're not going to mention 3, we're going to get to that, but apparently it didn't do good, unfortunately. Former engines such as MT Framework and Unity were super limited to what Takeuchi was trying to really go for, and they wanted something big and powerful that can give the players that immersive, terrifying first-person experience that future players really hope they got after seeing the famous E3 reveal. As of December of last year, 2021, Resident Evil 7 has sold 10.6 million copies and is a top-tier success and the highest selling in the series, and it did a lot more for Capcom than Capcom was actually expecting. Anyway guys, with that being said and done, I appreciate you for coming over to the channel. This is a new style of video I'm kind of going to be doing for a bit, especially for series like these or videos like these. Let me know what you think. If you made it through the whole thing, do me a favor, slap a like on the video, and don't forget to share it. If you think you want to see more, definitely give me a follow. My links are in the description down below. And with that being said, Resident Evil 8 is going to be up next. Lastly, be safe out there. This is Kaimax. Later.
I'm Redfield. I'm glad we found you.
The fuck took you guys so long?